Well, we're on the fourth challenge, and this one is on the elements of faith. I kind of like to take things apart. I like to kind of know how they work. Now, I'm not really good at it. Well, I'm pretty good at taking things apart. I'm not quite as good at putting it all back together. It certainly doesn't usually work when I put it all back together, but I do like taking it apart and looking at the different parts of it. And I've always kind of been that way. I like to do that. But I'm a little bit better, I think, I hope, a little bit better at taking a concept or some kind of some kind of truth that I read about in the Bible. I like to take that apart, and I like to look at it, the parts of it in isolation, to be able to pull out the components, to understand the individual components, and then hopefully put it all back together so that it actually works. And so I've done a little bit of that with faith. What I'm going to give you, there's five components, and they're they're not all the components of faith. I've only pulled out some big ones, I think. And I want to share them with you because I think if you can see them in isolation, then maybe you can see how they all fit together. So let's look at each one, and I'll try to explain just a little bit, just in a short period of time. First thing, the first element of our faith is the object of our faith. What is it, or who is it that we believe in? Because faith has to have an object. It has to have something to believe in, or someone to believe in. And in this case, obviously, that someone is God or his son, Jesus. We put our faith in them. And so the object of faith is very important. The second element of faith is this whole idea of personal faith. It has to be my faith. Not simply that there is an object of faith out there, but it has to be my faith. It's personal. It's my own personal reliance upon God, as opposed to someone else's, my parents, or just simply some mental assent to the idea of God. This is my personal faith, that I truly do believe in him. The third element is the will of God, because the will of God is so important to the concept of what does my faith do? What am I expecting of my faith? Faith is kind of that thing that brings me into alignment with the will of God. And so, as we saw in uh, another one of these videos, is that that's a very important element about his will and my will. But in this case, I just wanted to introduce this idea to you that God doesn't act outside of his will, and therefore what we expect of God is conformity to his own will. And our faith obviously allows us to conform to his will. And then the fourth element that I would pull out of this idea of faith is the idea of asking or expecting. Faith is an expectation. I can know who God is. I can have a belief in him. I can understand that he has a good, pleasing, and perfect will. But when I exercise my faith, I have an expectation that faith is going to actually accomplish something. Okay? And then there's a fifth element. And this fifth element is one that is kind of mysterious to me. And it's one that I find probably the most difficult aspect of faith. I would say it's my believing. It's actually demonstrating that I actually do believe. I can say I believe, I can have it in my heart that I believe, but there has to be something that happens that says I in fact believe. So the example I would give is obvious example of Peter, who was in the boat, and he says to Jesus, can I come to you on the water? And Jesus says, sure, come on. Well, there's a lot of things in Peter's head, I'm sure, at this point. He knows who Jesus is, and he knows that Jesus has invited him. He knows what the will of Jesus is. He knows that he has a reliance upon Jesus. But there's something about actually stepping out of the boat and putting your foot on the surface of the water. Now, that's the curious, mysterious part of this. It's actually putting that faith into action, taking a step, getting out of the boat, beginning to walk toward Jesus. Recognize you're totally, absolutely dependent on him. That's the element of faith I struggle with the most. I don't struggle with the first one. I know who God is. I know I believe in him. I don't struggle so much with the idea of my personal faith. It is my faith. I know that there's the will of God. I try to understand that will. I study the will of God. I have an expectation of what God is going to do, but actually getting out of the boat and putting my foot on the surface of the water is the most difficult part of faith. Now, faith is about all these elements and so much more than I'm unpacking for you here. But I want you to begin to take your faith apart, the elements of your faith apart, and see and examine each one and see what they're made of. And then hopefully we'll get it all back together and that faith will work for you. And so that's challenge number 4, the elements of faith.